I'm Betsey Dyer from the Walpole Historical Society. Before I start, I want to say it's very easy to find our new website. I don't even need to tell you the URL. You just need to Google Walpole Historical Society. You'll get to it and you're just going to be amazed. It's such a beautiful new website. And I also have some membership forms in case you want to join. You're supporting Walpole history. It's only $10 for a single membership. This is the only really good photo of the Walpole Hotel. And I just want to point out some things that intrigued me when I first saw it. And by the way, we have a very nice high-resolution version of this at the Historical Society. So if you want to come by and take a look at it, you might notice some details that you can't even notice up on the screen. But first of all, oh goodness, all right, I need my pointer thing. First of all, look at that really inviting veranda. And there's people just sitting very casually. That's a little girl there, and that's a little girl. I think I know who they are, which helps me to date this. Here's someone sitting very casually. I think there's someone looking out the window there. Look at that beautiful cupola there. And by the way, that's the present-day United Church in the background. At the time, it was a Unitarian church. But there it is. You can see when this was taken in the 1880s, there was nothing between the hotel, and I'll show you exactly where it is, and the present-day United Church. Now, the next slide is our only other photo of the hotel, and it's grainy, and I know that John and Sue Anderson tried to get it sharpened up. This is as sharp as they can get it, thank you very much. But what I love about this is it's even more casual. And these are young men, by the way. They're sitting on the roof. They climbed out the window. They're sitting on the roof. And then we have something way up there. And I'll bet you think that's intriguing. I actually have an idea about who that might be. We'll get to him. And doesn't it just look like a really interesting place to be? This was my starting place for this research. This is what caused me to write a book about it and then say, I think I'll also give a lecture on it. So that's my lecture for the evening. 1873 to 1892 wasn't in operation for very long. We have no hotel records. We have no hotel registers. Do we have no hope of finding out much of anything? In fact, John Anderson, who's sitting here, said, Betsy, we only have 2 photos of this. One of them's not very good. Are you really going to do an hour on this topic? I said, yeah, let me see if I can. All right. The only thing we had was 2 young newspaper editors who were hanging around the hotel lobby. In fact, I think one of them was actually living there, because if you were a single young man in town, like got married, and you had some kind of middle management job, you had a little bit of money, that might be the place you would live until you could get yourself settled in. So 2 young newspaper editors hanging around the lobby at least, but one of them I think actually living there for a time, and they were looking for news that would sell newspapers. And their motivation was just what newspapers are today. Well, actually what newspapers were 20 years ago. I don't know about newspapers today, they're horrible, but 20 years ago, they're just looking for news to cause you to buy newspapers so that you can see their advertisers. All right, so I'm going to tell you about the Walpole Star. I actually have a copy of the Walpole Star here, and how it was put together as a small town newspaper in the 19th century. And it's going to be relevant to the hotel, but we're not for the Walpole Star operating in this manner. I don't think I would have any information at all about this hotel. So thank goodness we have the Walpole Star. And by the way, it's now digitized. You want to do a digital search of it, come down to the Walpole Historical Society, and I can guide you through that. So it requires a modern, at that time, typesetting machine. So here's an example of what might have been available at that time. You needed to have this. We did not have one in Walpole. There was one in Foxborough, at Alden and Barron. They were on the common in Foxborough. And notice their advertisement. They're very proud of having this printing press. So there's this monotype machine that was brand new at the time. But they're mostly doing business cards and letterheads and posters and flyers, and that was their main business. And yes, they're also the office of the Foxborough Reporter. But their main business, their moneymaker, was outside of selling advertising for their newspaper, was doing all sorts of print jobs for people. Okay. And then in a different section of the same directory, we see that here are Alvin and Barron, and they in fact are printing, and they are the proprietors of the Foxborough Reporter, and at that time Foxborough Times was also operating. I won't say anything more about that, I'm not sure where that was coming out of, but I'm going to tell you all about the Foxborough Reporter, even though it might not seem relevant at first. Okay? And in order to do that, I need to tell you that the Foxborough Reporter and the Walpole Star and the Sharon Ozone and the Rentham Review were all the same newspaper. Now I'm going to demonstrate it to you with an actual Walpole Star. That's our newspaper. So this is a two-sheet newspaper. And imagine we're printing one side at a time. So you can even see from the back row, it says Walpole Star there. If you run this side of the sheet through first, then you will have a banner, and then you'll have all sorts of filler news. There's something about Belgium here, there's a train schedule that doesn't change, there's all kinds of little odds and ends stories, nothing special. You can print this weeks and weeks ahead of time, and you would put on Sharon Ozone, the Walpole Star, whichever one it was, okay? Now you turn it over and you run it through your press again. And it's more of the same sort of thing, except there's a little bit of Foxborough news, because this is coming out of Foxborough, so they're focused on Foxborough. Nothing yet that would make you say, let me read this, I want to know about Walpole. Now we go to their second sheet. This is a two-sheet newspaper. And now suddenly, all is revealed. We have a nice robust column of Rentham news, a nice column of Sharon news, nice column of Walpole news in here. And I know, I'm going to tell you some of the news that was in here so you can get an idea of the flavor of it. But every town got the same second sheet. So if you were in Walpole reading the so-called Walpole Star, you were also reading the Rentham news, you were also reading the Sharon news, you were also reading the Foxborough news, which makes it a really interesting newspaper, in my opinion. We have, obviously, original copies of this. I've read this newspaper cover to cover several times. And when I say the whole newspaper, no, the Walpole section of the newspaper. It is so worth reading. It's really fun. And here's one of the reasons.
Betsy, what's the date of that newspaper?
This is 1883, I think. This was 1887. But it started in 1882 and went to 1900. All right, so here I am using an actual Walpole Star to demonstrate, which I just did. Now we need to know where the Walpole news was coming from. You could post at the Walpole Hotel. There was a box in the lobby. So if something interesting happened in town, or if something interesting happened in the hotel, which plenty of interesting things happen. In fact, if you were living at the hotel, and you were up to some hijinks the night before, and you thought it would be really fun to post something, it would get into the newspaper, because newspapers sell if they've got kind of racy, fun, controversial news in them. And I don't mean great long stories, I mean something like a Facebook post. There's my Facebook page. I'm going to use the Facebook analogy all the way through this and see if I don't get it right. Okay? By the way, I am not active on Facebook, so do not trust. I only get 46 friends. Don't even attempt to friend me. But I'm going to tell you about Facebook in connection with this, because they're literally posting these little snippets of things in the Walpole column by depositing them in a box at the Walpole Hotel. This I discovered and I was thrilled to discover it. All right, I'm going to actually give you a few lines from this. That's an example of one column of news. Notice how short the stories are. Okay, trust me, I'm going to walk you through some of this. For example, one of the stories is just a single line. John Mann is back from his trip south. Doesn't it sound like Facebook? A large weasel was seen chasing a squirrel. And by the way, there was dog news and cat news as well. And you dog and cat people know. dog and cat news as well, but here's the weasel story. A pool room is not to be, so there's plenty of griping about this or that, either happening in town or not happening in town. And pool was actually an issue in town, with billiards rooms. Ice cream, cake, and other refreshments will be available at the, I think that's the Methodist Church, I'm not sure why that got cut off. So just a little sort of, hey, we have a little festive thing. The clock on the townhouse stopped Tuesday night, that's the entire article. So just dropped it into the box. An anonymous correspondent who calls himself North Ender accuses the selectmen of neglecting their duty and then endorses them. So if you had a little gripe with someone in town, you could post something, and it might go in, which is why I love to read our Walpole column. And then you'll never guess what just happened at the Walpole Hotel. So lots and lots and lots of news about the Walpole Hotel posted by the folks themselves. Plus lots of church news and lots of temperance society news. Those were some of the longest columns. I mean, if a minister wanted to get in 4 or 5 paragraphs, they would print it. You could come away thinking that Walpole was a dry town. I can tell you it was not. I can tell you there were just 2 contingents in town. There was the temperance and church group, and then there were the other folks. And you can actually see that dichotomy in the newspaper. But these guys got plenty of press. All right, so where was the Walpole Hotel? All right, so let me get you oriented a little bit. This is where the Walpole Hotel will be built. Here's Walpole Center. So we're just a little bit south of Walpole Center. I'll get really specific in just a bit. And what was exciting about this period is we had recently, in the last 20 years, taken this nice straight road that goes all the way into Walpole Center and kept it going straight all the way to Rentham, which it still does today. Previous to 1830, it had come all the way to Walpole Center and then kind of snaked through the woods like this. And finally, we have a nice straight road, which we still drive on, Route 1A, right? Furthermore, in the 1840s, the railroad had come to town. There's a railroad line, and we know in the middle of town we actually have 2 railroads crossing. So this hotel ends up being in a really good spot. Here's Walpole Center, future site of the Walpole Hotel. We got a nice straight road to Rentham coming from Norwood, and we have rail lines. It's surprising there wasn't a big hotel put there before this, but it took all the way to 1873 apparently. And here is, I guess, the only other picture of the Walpole Hotel. This is an artist's conception from a bird's eye view map. See, this is a pretty substantial building there. Here's the present-day United Church, which, as I said, was a Unitarian church at the time. And here's the Walpole Hotel. Here's that great big veranda. Here's Main Street. It's across the street from the Nappers, all right? You're thinking, what? There's nothing much across the street except for a law office and an office building. There it is. Okay, so there's the Nappers right there. So I think this, well, no thing. This was the hotel side yard right there. And this building doesn't quite cover the footprint of the Walpole Hotel. It goes off into the woods there. There's currently no building there. So you can visualize where this is. Okay, and it's there no more. And what I'm going to do is walk you through landlord by landlord. There was quite a turnover of landlords for this hotel because often the landlord's philosophy of being hospitable was overly gay and frivolous and joyful compared to the point of view of whatever owner it was. So there were quite a few landlords who were fired or dismissed for excessive gaiety. But not these. We start with a 2-year period, 3-year period of a strange focus on dentistry. We won't spend too much time on it, but it was off to a really rough start. You get a brand new hotel in place, and then I'll show you what they did, which to me was not auspicious for the hotel. But pretty soon, we have E.E. Chamberlain and his warm reputation for hospitality, or his reputation for warm hospitality. He doesn't last long for a reason. I'll get to why that is. Then we have a fire. Yeah, the first fire, so you know it's going to be a second. Then we have James Manning. I call him the great optimist. Interesting landlord. Followed by A.O. Grant, who was famous for his musical programs, especially out on the veranda, so the entire neighborhood could hear. And this is all posted in the news. And then William Horner. So his era was when the bicycle craze was really beginning, and there was a huge craze in Walpole, all of the surrounding towns, but also worldwide. I mean, bicycles were becoming the thing for especially young men to go tearing around on, and he was a stop for the bicyclists. Then we have the widow Manning. Let me just point out, so yeah, James Manning dies back here. His wife, his widow, continues to own it. She has less of a sense of humor about some of this stuff. She's had just about enough. She hires our final landlord, Mr. Dexter, and I call it a dismal final year with him. It was in the newspaper, and then finally a final fire, which is why we don't have it anymore. All right, so 1873, a new hotel opens, about 30 rooms. It's a huge hotel compared to even a hotel that you might put there now. Yes?
What was the population of Walpole there?
About 1,500. Yeah, but they were getting a lot of traffic. This was, I mean, there might have been some young men from middle management jobs in here, but they were also getting a lot of traffic, stagecoach traffic and train traffic. Nice big dining room. Imagine that with big windows going out into the veranda. And it was owned by a consortium of mill and business owners. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole list of 15. I just want to point out a couple of things. They called themselves the Neponset Hotel Company. First and foremost was Willard Lewis, that's of the Lewis batting mills that later became Kendall Mills. He was the majority owner. And then, if you know your Walpole Big Shots, it was a list of the Walpole Big Shots, the big mill owners. So what were they doing owning a hotel? I think they thought they were going to make some money on it. I think they thought, well, I'm just going to keep running my mill, but I'm going to have a hotel on the side, and there'll be some extra income coming in. Should be effortless. Turns out I think they were mistaken about that for a number of reasons. All right, so they immediately hire a Mr. Burgess, fire him, and I couldn't quite figure out or find out when and how. Then it was Mr. Arms and Mr. Baker. And the first 2 years, there was very little advertising. I'll show you the kind of advertising there was. Let me go back a slide. No. Show you the kind of advertising there was. But in the end, Mr. Arms and Mr. Baker were called the prohibitionists in the newspaper. Very, very short article. I know it was sarcastic. I've read enough of the Walpole Star to know that it means that Arms and Baker were anything but prohibitionists. And that began the problem at the hotel, that it did not always fit with people's idea of what people should be doing in town. So they were not prohibitionists with good quotes. Here's the real problem. The only advertising during that period was for a dentist. So E.A. Boyd, dentist, he's going to be at the Walpole Hotel every Saturday, all day, from 9 to 5. That was the only advertising. I poured through the newspapers looking for anything that would make me want to go to the hotel, because think about 19th century dentistry, think about having your teeth pulled, think about why you would want to go to the lobby on a Saturday of the Walpole Hotel when the main thing that's going on is a dentist. So, to me, we already have a problem here. And the hotel got sold at an auction, kind of a controversial auction, in which there were certain shenanigans done financially that were really difficult to follow, making me think 19th century business people kind of knew what they were doing on some of these things. But I won't get into the shenanigans. And Deacon Willard Lewis, okay, this is the Lewis batting mills, this is, eventually it's Kendall, one of the most important people in town. When he died in 1892, we heard that he founded the Orthodox Church because the Unitarian Church, now the United Church, was too liberal for him, so he needed to have a much more conservative church. It was over where Gallows Flowers was, near the, what's the bakery there? Anyway,
Farmer in the Bill.
Farmer in the Dell. He was a thorough temperance man. This is in his obituary. And there was absolutely nothing about him ever owning or starting a hotel. It just was in his past. So he could not get rid of it fast enough. By the way, that was his home. That is the Walpole Historical Society. That's what we call the Deacon Willard Lewis House. And behind there, you can see remnants of Kendall Mills. That used to be his mill, so he was overlooking his mills. All right, end of that for him. He sold it. He's done. But we still have a problem with dentistry. We have 10 months with the next owners who also tried to run it themselves, Nehemiah Folsom and his nephew John, both of whom were dentists. So again, we have this very strange situation in which I think they were practicing they were roving dentists in those days. It made sense for you to go from town to town doing things. I don't know what they were thinking, but again, we don't have much of anything except dentistry. Yes, here's their ad, Hotel Walpole. Here they are, the Folsoms. It's new, it's thoroughly furnished, excellent bill of fare, convenient to the station. Nonetheless, there's nothing exciting going on yet. Okay, now we get out of the doldrums for this hotel. But first of all, the owner at the time said we need to freshen everything up. Hotel closes, they sold it twice. People could not get rid of this fast enough. I think people in town who didn't know what they were doing with hotels were like, you have it, you see if you can make a go of it. Looks like you ought to be able to make a go of it if you knew what you were doing. Meanwhile, someone broke into the hotel, took a gallon of whiskey, a lot of cigars, and some money, showing that, at least in this little newspaper article, something had been going on there, even with the dentistry going on with the Folsoms. All right, now finally we have an exciting 2-year period with landlord D.E. Chamberlain. Notice he's just 39 years old. That helps a little bit, I think. D is for Dudley. And we have an owner here who was fairly tolerant of what D.E. Chamberlain was up to. He was the first one to have real hotel experience. He had worked at the Amherst Hotel in Amherst, New Hampshire. Wasn't the sole proprietor or anything at that age, but he had worked there, so he knew something about real big hotel hospitality. And then he had worked at the Summit House in Ethel, Massachusetts. That was what he had done previous to coming to Walpole. So it looks like it might be a good couple of years with him. And at the same time, a newspaper man, age 21, came to town. He's Charles McPherson. And I'm pretty sure he was a resident of the hotel. He certainly was a frequent visitor. And I know you're thinking this is contradicting what I just said, because I had newspaper and newspaper commentary before he arrived. Remember, you could get Walpole News in the Foxborough paper. What was new is he started to call the column the Walpole Star. So I can read Walpole News before we even have the Walpole Star, and I did. Okay, and McPherson, by the way, went on to found the Framingham Tribune. He became actually quite important in Framingham once he got done with Walpole. All right, so once again, this is the pattern with ads. It's always newly opened, beautiful location near the railroads, free carriage from the station, a great idea. Pick people up at the station. And now D.E. Chamberlain is in charge. And he started putting on hops. That was the word used for it. I wish this were a picture of the Walpole Hotel. It isn't. This is from something described by Mark Twain in New York City. But it's the kind of wild dancing that was going on at the Walpole Hotel fairly regularly. And it was like D.E. Chamberlain's put on yet another hop. Yet another fun hop has occurred at the hotel. So the place was starting to become attractive to all sorts of people. And now we do one of our first digressions that I hope you'll enjoy, what I call the Edward Heffley story. He's one of the hotel residents for a time. Now, here's about Edward, and this is also going to be about his friend Frank Sladen. Here's the hotel right here. Here's the Neponset River, which you know goes underneath the mill building, so yes, it does continue there, comes out there, so you get oriented. Here's Main Street. Here's our railroad station, and across the street from the railroad station, there was a big color and dye works. Now there's just a train yard. But across the street was this, something like this building, which was employing chemists who were working with dyes and colors for cloth. And the railroad station is where a telegram arrived one day for Edward Heffley from Europe. Came all the way from Europe. Now, this is a very small town, everyone knows each other. Telegraphs are supposed to be private. I can just bet that the word was out. Edward has got a telegraph from Europe, however that comes in, and maybe even a hint of what it said. So let's find out what it said. Yeah. Okay. And by the way, here's their walking work, hotel, the color work, so they pick up the telegraph there. That Edward was going to be heir to a vast European fortune of $9 million. 2/3 were going to go to charity. That's supposed to say 1/3. Wow. I have 1/9 there. 1/3. Oh, it's 1/9. Sorry. It's 1/3 total, and then, yes, divide by 3. It is 1/9. I did it correctly. All right. 1/9 for each of the 3 brothers. Edward would earn the equivalent of $1 million. This is someone living in the Walpole Hotel, working as a chemist across the street from the railroad station. Let me just put this into perspective, because immediately when I saw that in the newspaper, this was in the newspaper, I said, what is $9 million for that time? $9 million was greater than the GDP of the United States. Yeah, Susan, you can confirm it for me. I looked it up.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, okay.
I don't see nothing for it.
No. She's giving me a look. $9 million is greater than the GDP of the German Empire at that time. Now, why am I bringing the German Empire into it? Because the telegram actually came from the German Empire. Right? Germany didn't exist, it was the German Empire. It's the Alsace region of Germany. At that time, Alsace was in Germany. And so Edward's going to be getting the equivalent of 1 million. But that's what 9 million was. So I was like, let's see some valuations here. So the entire hotel was worth $10,000, just to give you a little perspective of what 1 million is. You could stay there for $2 per day. The entire color works where Edward and his friend Frank were living was worth $16,000. At least that's what they were being taxed on. You can look it up and see what they're being taxed on. So something was just, and then he was going to immediately depart for Germany or the German Empire to Alsace with his friend Frank Sladen. He's going to immediately depart like the next week. They're going to get a boat. All right? Is anyone thinking scam? So I really looked into this because my first thought is scam. Some of you were thinking it as well. You're thinking, oh my goodness, I hope there's a follow-up newspaper article all about what really happened and how they got taken by this telegraph. So I looked into it very carefully. I even had to read French language and German language newspapers. French I'm okay with, German was tough, but I had to do that in order to figure this out, because they went to Europe, and I needed to follow them there, and I did. Oh, but they kept writing back to the hotel, and their letters kept getting posted at the hotel, and then we get excerpts of the letters in the Walpole Star. And so it's just beautiful for me as a researcher. It wasn't a scam. Here's Henri Heffley. He was a major industrialist and philanthropist in the Alsace region, at that time German Empire. Sometimes it's France, sometimes it's Germany. This is Edward's father. Yep, I checked it. I did the genealogy on him just to make sure. I was like, yeah, really? Okay, that's his father. That's his mill. Okay, I showed you the color works across from the station. This is the Heffley mill in Alsace. So at that time, in the late 19th century, organic chemistry was coming into its own, and one of its first uses was in organic dyes. So up until the late 19th century, you could get, browns and dull blues and dull greens. Suddenly you get bright purples and bright oranges and bright yellows. These are chemical dyes. And the center of all the research on these chemical dyes was Germany. And then to narrow it down even more, the center of research for these guys was here at the Heffley plant. And so where Edward had gotten his chemistry knowledge was growing up working here, as the rest of the family were all chemists as well. And remember, he's working as a chemist in Walpole. And here's the story that got posted in the Walpole Star. This is from a letter back from Germany, that he was the youngest of 12. Some of them had not survived all the way to this point, and some of them were girls. They did not inherit, so we're down to 1/3 of father's remaining fortune. It's him and his 2 brothers. He was of a roving disposition, a little bit rebellious. His family said, stay right here. You're wealthy, you can be a chemist here, you're going to own the place soon. He rebelled, and he went off, as they said, dependent entirely upon his own resources, so proudly ignoring the family fortune. However, as he traveled along, and I followed him, I saw him go to England to become a dye chemist there, because that was another place you could be a dye chemist. Then I saw him go to Lowell, Massachusetts to be a dye chemist there. It's another place where that sort of thing was going on. Then he comes down to Walpole, of all places, to be a dye chemist here. Nonetheless, he was keeping a forwarding address with the family. Okay, he wasn't totally roving. They were able to find him in Walpole, so that's interesting, I think. So he and Frank Sladen, who by the way was just from around here, went and bought this place, the Chateau of the Four Turrets, where they lived happily for a time. I'll get to what happened later, but for a time, because I said, I'm going to follow these, even though they were off the track from the Walpole town, I'm going to follow these for a little bit. So I did. So that is their Chateau of the Four Turrets, not too far from the giant plant. Is anyone thinking, are this a 19th century openly gay couple? Okay. Openly not, because it was illegal to be a gay couple anywhere in the world at that time. And it was still illegal into the 20th century in many places, into the late 20th century. It's still illegal in some parts of the world today, in the 21st century. So the word openly, no. But they were gay, and here's how I know. Kind of a sad story. I really wanted to find out what went on with them. I had to read some German for this one too. Ended up in a German language newspaper. About 10 years after this, they had to spend a little bit of time in jail. I think it was just about a year each for being gay, because that was what happened in those days. Then I said, okay, I need to follow them further. I'm not going to go too much off on a tangent with them, because we need to get back to the Walpole Hotel. I think they made out okay. They were wealthy. I think wealth protects you a little bit from some of these things, but nonetheless, it wasn't an ideal situation for them. Back to the hotel, but we have one more thing to say about Edward. So, before he left town with Frank, he ran around town paying his creditors. And I also think he was laying out tips. I think he was giving bonuses. I think he had cash in his pocket. He was handing cash to people. He was a friendly guy. He said he was going to maintain a correspondence, and he did. That's why we know what was going on. I think his correspondent was Joseph Hawes. More about Joseph Hawes later. Now, how do I know he was handing out money? Well, because the hotel clerk, who should not be able to afford it, because I know what these guys make, you can figure out a lot about people just from reading newspapers and directories, bought a new fast-stepping horse, which is like saying he bought a sports car. So I think he was given a very big tip, the hotel clerk. The hotel got fresh paint and a new fence, and this is within 6 months of them leaving. Within 6 months, suddenly, fresh paint, new fence. And in addition, the Chamberlain Dance Hall and a new billiards room. Again, within 6 months of him leaving. So I think he gave his hotel owner or landlord a nice tip. And they started having hops almost every evening. The place was rocking. They had performing bears and performing horses in. And then something sad. At age 41, I think it was kidney disease, D.E. Chamberlain died. And then shortly after, look, he dies in March of 1878. In August, a fire started in a defective chimney and the place burned to the ground, absolutely burned to the ground. So that could be the end of it. There could only be a 5-year story here, but then something amazing happens. By the way, fires in those days, for a big wooden building like that, nobody was going to put those out. I don't think there was any success in putting out big building fires. They just tried to control it so it didn't burn down the neighborhood. All right, but now we're going to have 6 years with James Manning. Not only a genial host, but I'm going to call him quite an optimist. Let me show you what an optimist he was. First of all, what's he buying? He's buying he's going to buy an empty lot with a foundation and the remnants of a burned down hotel. I call it optimistic. He comes from England. I tried to figure out if he was from a pub-owning family. Couldn't figure that out. But here, let's start him in England, Gabe up there. Let's have him take a boat all the way around the Horn of Africa. He's not going anywhere near us. He's coming all the way around, up the Pacific Ocean. Where's he going? He's going to the gold rush. Here's the gold rush right there, okay? So that's his motivation for even leaving England. He does something very smart. He does not start panning for gold. He sells things to the people who are panning for gold. Therefore, he makes some money, whereas the gold panners are doing something more risky. So he makes some money. He slowly makes his way across the United States, also making some money here and there by cleverly selling things to people. And then at some point, he does something that I thought was a little strange, but maybe it was routine for its time. He sends a letter to, I think, the Douglas, Massachusetts newspaper, advertising for a bride. And then, strangely, gets one. And we'll see her in just a minute. And they get married. And the two of them, newly married, say, let's buy a vacant lot with a burned-down hotel and have a hotel. Okay, but there's a little bit more to the story because I had to look into things. I was like, okay, let me see what's going on here. Here they are, by the way. Here's James, and here's Louisa Dudley Manning. She grew up in the Dudley Hotel in Douglas. It still doesn't mean you buy a burned-down building, but she grew up in the Dudley Hotel in Douglas. Douglas, by the way, is a very interesting town. It's actually at what used to be a major colonial crossroads, and there's an old post road that goes through it, and this Dudley Hotel is actually quite the thing. In fact, I might go and look for it. There it is. Looks very intriguing, doesn't it? It's a private home now. So it's one of these really old colonial taverns. Nonetheless, pretty optimistic, even though she has a little bit of hotel experience, to build this. Now, remember I said I have a pretty good idea about who this, at least one of these little girls is, maybe both of them. So this is the hotel that they built. By the way, they built it within a year. But it's also the way the hotel looked before, pretty much, because they built it on the foundation, and we have descriptions of it before. It's just that I think the photograph was from after Manning built it, okay? This little girl, I think, is A.O. Well, the landlords, these are two of the landlord's daughters from the landlord that will come up in a few years. All right, and we advertise it yet again, except now it really is rebuilt, refitted, a first-class country hotel and stable, James Manning, proprietor. Okay, we're off for a nice 6 years. I want to show you something. This is our newspaper editor. He's doing carpentry on the side, right? Because being a newspaper editor means that he's in charge of one column of this, right? It's being printed in Foxborough, and he's just collecting the news from the lobby, okay? So he had a side gig of being a carpenter. That is Charles McPherson. All right, because at the same time, he said, that should be Charles, drop off your news at the hotel. The Walpole Star is now our newspaper that is going to be really in the form of just a column. All right, now we have Joseph Hawes, our next little digression. He's another long-term hotel resident. He was a correspondent with Frank and Edward, thank goodness. That's how I found out about them. And he was the owner of a large trust fund that came from railroad money. I looked into it. because I needed to contrast him with other wealthy young men in town, most of whom were the sons of mill owners. And if you were the son of a mill owner, if you were this person right here, here's Burden's son, then you did not have a lot of leisurely time on your hands. You were being groomed to take over the family business. So you were probably starting in the mailroom, working your way up, learning all the different aspects of it, and eventually this would be you. You would be in charge of Burden's son. And here's Willard Lewis's son. He's the heir to the Lewis batting bill. This young man did not have a lot of extra time on his hands. Joseph Hawes had a ton of extra time on his hands because he had inherited from his late parents railroad money. All he had was money to spend. And he was living at the hotel and really enjoying himself. And I actually think that he's one of the people on this photo. And later I'll show you that fuzzy photo. And I think we're going to pin him down even more. But I won't show you that fuzzy photo yet. All right, so here we come with some real Facebook posting. I'm going to start at the top. Joseph was very popular in town. I think he was called Joe. Joe was very popular in town. As he was leaving the Walpole Hotel for the summer season, there'll be a post. Joseph has just departed from Walpole. That would be the news. That's what caught my eye. I was like, who is this Joseph? And then I started reading the Nantucket newspaper. Joseph has just arrived in Nantucket. They were picking him up as he arrived. Okay? He was spending the summer at the Springfield House in Nantucket. A version of that still exists, but not quite in that format. And then at the end of the summer, there'd be another post in the Nantucket paper, and now he is departing Nantucket. And then the Walpole Times, the Walpole Star would pick it up. Joseph has just arrived back to Walpole and is now at the Walpole Hotel. This is what made me think of Facebook. And it's just these very short articles, nothing much more than that. They're just enough to keep track of it. Here's one of his hobbies. I'm going to tell you two of his many relevant hobbies. He tended to have fairly expensive, fairly time-consuming hobbies because he had plenty of time on his hands. He liked homing pigeons. He also liked fancy pigeons. I'm not going to show you a lot of pigeon pictures. These are homing pigeons where you can tie a little message to their leg and send them off to deliver the message. He loved those. He raised them. He also raised fancy pigeons. He started a pigeon craze in Walpole so that anyone of his age and group who was already doing something with poultry would be raising some pigeons on the side because he was encouraging them to. And then even had fancy pigeon shows at Town Hall. So it was that big a craze in Walpole. But here's what Joseph did. Oh, by the way, later on he lived here at 1101 Main Street, which still is there. You can take a look as you drive by. I wonder if there was a pigeon loft somewhere in here at some point. I'm not sure there was. But I'll show you where I think he might have been flying his pigeons from. So, he flew pigeons from Nantucket. This was in the newspaper, Nantucket newspaper, very excited. Joseph has just released pigeons. Look at that. I mean, if we were coming from Nantucket, we would be like, okay, but he lined straight to Walpole, and then the Walpole Times picks it up. The pigeons have just arrived to Walpole, and to me it would be irresistible to use that cupola. Can you imagine having the pigeons coming into there? I'm not saying that was definitely for sure, but so that's one of his hobbies. Had time on his hands for a young man. He was also a kite builder. So this is again, big Nantucket news and big Walpole news. He built something called the Excelsior, the largest kite ever flown of its time, they said. 19 by 9.5 feet. It was red. It could be seen for 5 miles. He especially flew it on the beach in Nantucket. Took 4 men and a cyclone to get it in the air. He started a kite craze in Walpole. He would put up money for prizes for young kids, mostly boys, to build kites and then compete with them. And so he started this whole, wherever he was, I think he was charismatic and usually had a following of people who wanted to see what he was doing and try it out for themselves. And that's why I think this is him. I really do think this is him. I think he was a person who liked things that go up in the air. It wasn't his only hobbies, he had other ones as well, but I think this was him. It's the right era, And he's up in a cupola, and I can really imagine not flying a kite from there necessarily, but having pigeons coming into that cupola. All right, so James Manning died at age 61. And his widow, there she is, hired a new landlord, and the hotel was now going to be run on strict temperance principles. The word principle there is missing, but strict temperance principles. I don't want to say this about a 19th century photograph, but she looks like a pretty strict temperance. But of course, you know, people, normal photographs like that, nobody ever, okay. And so she hires A.O. Brandt, who turns out to really love music. I'll show you how much. And music is heard throughout the neighborhood. That's a quote from the newspaper. This stands for Alpheus Orville, A.O. Brandt. And he starts calling it the Walpole House, which is a slightly racier version of Walpole Hotel. And he starts to become the destination for sleigh rides. And when I say sleigh ride, I mean for two people, young man, young woman, at night, under blankets, heading out under the moonlight. These would be moonlight sleigh rides coming from other towns. So this was like a fun courting thing for young people. But if they were traveling from another town, they needed a place to stop and get something to eat and get warmed up. So we became a destination for the sleigh riding crowd. And he could make dinner at short notice for 20 people on sleigh rides. And I'm sorry, I don't know why this is cut off on this particular screen. I gave this talk at the COA and the slides were not cut off. But anyway, he could do dinner at short notice for 20 sleigh riders coming in. That would be 10 sleighs coming in at night. And here's an example, and this is a Facebook post, of one of his sleigh dinners. Salmon, ham, tongue, corned beef, spare ribs, lamb, and much more, and 11 different desserts. What that is a joke. Someone said, wow, that was some big dinner we had last night. Let me just make a joke, and it goes in the newspaper, and stick it into the posting box. Just like people do Facebook posts, here's what I'm eating, isn't it amazing? Or I just went to a restaurant, we had so much to eat. So I think it's sort of like that. It was a little joke. There's no way he had all that on hand at 10 o'clock at night. And then we had a big flood in February 1886. And this again is a Facebook post. A.O. Brandt fed 400 people who had been stranded. Well, I'll tell you something. The population of the town is 2,500. I don't think there were 400 people. I'll tell you that the real number was maybe closer to 50. We'll get to the next post in a minute. But A.O. Brandt fed a huge number of people in the flood. He was known for that. And we have our very first telephone takeout order in Walpole because there were 50 people stranded at the railroad station. Now, the phone had just arrived to Walpole. I'm going to be giving a lecture on first telephone electricity at the Senior Center in October. And I'll probably do it here too. I can tell you, the telephone had just arrived to Walpole. The train station had one, and the Walpole Hotel had one. And they actually called in food, and it got delivered to the railroad station. So I checked that out just to see, okay, so what they're really saying is, here's the railroad station where they were stranded, here's the hotel. It was a big enough flood that this was really overtopping its banks, and I guess people couldn't comfortably get out of this area. How they were getting food across, I don't know. What? By boat. It didn't say by boat, and it would have, I think, if it hadn't. So this, I think, there's a bit of exaggeration, too. Right? I mean, new people in town wouldn't know where to go. They did their first call-in takeout order, which I love. All right, now we get to the music. 5th of July. So Walpole has a tradition of doing anything but 4th. So over the decades, we've had 5th of July, 6th of July, 3rd of July. I've rarely come across 4th of July. In those days, it was 5th of July. They had a 26-piece Walpole cornet band playing 16 numbers on a bandstand in the front yard of the Walpole Hotel, and a chorus of 50 children singing patriotic songs from the piazza, loud. And I'll tell you something, this 26-piece Walpole cornet band, it got as big as it wanted to. Every young man in town wanted to be a part of it. So you get little articles about so-and-so is learning to play the cornet so he can be in the band. There was no limit to how many you could be in the cornet band. Here's a picture of them, and you can tell they're loud. They've got 4 drums. They've got some tubas here. It was all about loudness and brass instruments. Some kind of tuba there as well. So there they are playing.
You know where that building is?
I wish I did, and if there's anyone here that knows where that building is, because I think that, so this, they would go around to different towns. Other towns had their cornet bands. I would love if someone knew where this building was, because we don't know. All right, July 17th. Ice cream and chowder served, and the newspaper said it's not actually necessary to be at the hotel to hear the Norwood National Band. So they used to travel around these bands of young men. Oops, oh dear. Wow. Okay, there's the Norwood National Band. You can see it just as loud. Okay, and by the way, I don't know where that is in Norwood either. It's possible.
I think that's the church.
Oh, you think it is? Okay.
It's a Unitarian church.
Right across from the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Do you think that this is actually the Unitarian?
Could possibly be the Norwood Town Hall.
Yeah.
Well, I've studied the outside of the Norwood Town Hall, unless they really renovated. Okay, well, let's think about that. But anyway, there they are. They came to play at the hotel. And they had a Rhode Island Shore dinner with Chinese lanterns in the yard, and the loud Norwood National Band came in. By the way, he brought up a bake master from Rhode Island, so it was a serious clam bake of the sort that they know how to do, real bake master. Now, you might think the neighbors would have complained, so I looked into that. All right, let's discuss these neighbors a little bit. First of all, here's Joseph Hawes, eventually lives there. I hope he's not complaining, because he was in the center of a lot of this kind of stuff. This is Joseph Hawes, our heir with the pigeons and the kites and all. Here's George Hartson. Here's the hotel. He's right across the street from the hotel. He became a famous band leader in Boston. And he had some of his first gigs at the hotel. So I hope he's not complaining, because he was loud as well. Here is Mrs. French. Her husband was one of the initial investors in the hotel. Here's Willard Lewis and Clara Engley. That's the son and daughter of one of the investors, major investors in the hotel. The hotel wouldn't be in their backyard if it were not that they made some money off of it at some point. So I'm going to say in the immediate neighborhood, there should have been no serious complaining about the noise. Nonetheless, it was a noisy neighborhood in those days. All right, I'm going to show you this. We recently got this at the Historical Society. It was given to us by Colin Harding, who occasionally looks and finds things on eBay for us. Music by Hartson's Orchestra at Bacon Hall in Walpole, Mass. Different place in Walpole. But look, at that point, he's of Boston. Okay, so he actually went up and became a big band leader, would come back to Walpole to play. All right, so now Louisa Mann tries to pull something. This is the widow. This is the one who wants to run it on strict temperance. She pretended to sell the hotel so she could get out of her contract with A.O. Grant. She actually said she sold it. So I'm sorry, A.O. Grant, see you later, right? Just had it with the loud music and the clam bakes and everything else. And she also, I think, organized the raid of the constables at the hotel. They did not find any liquor. Probably A.O. Grant cleared it out. I don't know. I'm pretty sure she organized it. It's just a little coincidence. She's selling the hotel and then they have a raid. And by the way, A.O. Grant went on to found the Medfield Inn in Medfield, Mass. That's on North Street across from Prairie Street. They're not there anymore. So he's okay. He lands on his feet. She hires William Horner, who was a great favorite of bicycle clubs. And again, we're remodeled, we're refurnished, we're under new direction, so that all the ads are about how everything's going to be brand new with the new landlord. And the Walpole Hotel became an official league house of the Wheelman's Association, which means it was in books like this. So this is the 1894 Bicycle Club Directory. Each state had these, I don't know about way out west, but around here, each state had these. Town by town, it would tell bicyclists what the road conditions were like, because they were all gravel roads, some of them muddy roads, and tell them where they could confidently stop for food and where they could even stay overnight if they were doing a long distance trip, and they would do long distance trips. And bicycle clubs became a major thing. For example, here's the Attleboro Bicycle Club. Notice that they even have uniforms. I know the Attleboro Bicycle Club came to the Walpole Hotel and had a nice dinner. I know plenty of other ones did too. The Jamaica Plain Bicycle Club will make a moonlight run. They used to, if the moon was out, these young men would get on their bikes, and it is for the most part young men, and just come tearing down from JP. So of course they needed to have some place to stop, and the Walpole Hotel was a league house, so it was one of the stops. Roxbury and Attleboro Bicycle Clubs met at the hotel for a famous cycling dinner. He became known for his cycling dinners, just like the previous landlord was doing the sleigh dinners. So, Louisa Manning closes the hotel for a year and sells all the furnishings. This caused a great hue and cry in the Walpole Star. What's happened to the hotel? All the furnishings are gone. She claims she's going to buy new ones. She did not. So people were upset. And then she sells the hotel to Horace Briggs, who's one of our prominent Walpole business people, who installs our final landlord, Joseph Rector, and then we proceed to have a kind of a dismal final ending. Of course, it's newly furnished, because she sold all the furnishings, so now it's going to be newly furnished. And for the first time, we either get some bad press or just bad luck, or he's not a good landlord. I'm not sure why. I'll give you some examples as we sort of dwindle down. It's still a league house, because it doesn't get out of the Wheelman's book there. But Walpole and other towns were starting to crack down, because these young men, these bicycle clubs, would be riding up on sidewalks, they would be racing, they would be tearing around corners, they'd be scaring horses, and so Walpole actually started to put in some bylaws about bicyclists, and so did other towns, so it started to become a slightly less friendly place. Let me show you what they were up against. Look at that. Can you imagine a Walpole Bicycle Club in the town? So you needed to start to, and they would have races. They would be racing each other and just not even caring who was in the way, and tearing and cutting each other off. So, and then we have problems like this. One of the there were many theatrical companies that came from town who stayed at the hotel. They failed to pay their bill, and landlord Rector had to hold them in place and then go with them to their next gig and sell the tickets himself so he could get his money back. And that was a news story, and not a very positive one either. There was a sleigh crash due to inebriation. Now you're probably thinking, you're probably plenty of sleigh crashes due to inebriation. but the fact is, that was the only news about sleighs that year. It wasn't like, oh, we had a great sleighing party, it was so wonderful, 20 people had food. It's like a sleigh crash due to inebriation. There was a grand bluff game by a con man. So, con man probably there were plenty of con men coming through, but that was the sole news article. A demented woman was slaying here. Yeah. So it's starting to not look so positive. And now we have a real problem. May of 1892, Rector and his family moved out to downtown. The place is already downtown. It is downtown. We're talking about across from Tandy's, right? So when I say moved down, he moved 100 feet down the road. And about a day later, the hotel burned down. Okay, it gets worse. Yeah, I know. I couldn't believe it. Just moved out so blatantly. I thought he was going to get away with it. It was evidence of arson. It started after midnight, and simultaneously the hotel and the barn caught fire. Simultaneous. Yeah. And a nearby blacksmith shop got destroyed. It's behind, if you know where the Parsonage Tree United Church is, there's still a house back there, but the original house was a blacksmith shop and it got destroyed. So that's a little suspicious. Nobody was in residence at the hotel. Landlord had moved out and sold all the guests, and there were no animals in the barn. And there was a smell of kerosene. So this is a really long article, unusually long article. You could tell people were really upset about it. Whoever wrote the article was very upset about it. the firemen were able to save the billiards table. Yeah. And I have a hypothesis. If the firemen ran in to save the billiards table, which is going to be pretty heavy to haul out the door, I suspect the firemen were accustomed to playing on that billiards table, and probably that was one of the first things they wanted to get out of there. That, of course, is not it. I pulled that off of mine. And thus ended the 19 on and off years at the Walpole Hotel. Would you like to know more about the Heir to Fortune Edward Heffley, leisure pastime of Joseph Hawes, bicycle clubs, alcohol, billiards, and Walpole news reporting? I just happened to have a few copies of the Walpole Hotel for $15. And are there any questions?
Any insurance in those days, Betty?
Some people had insurance, some did not. This was insured, I'm pretty sure. I know this from doing my ice house research. Most of the ice houses were not insured. Every now and then there was one. Good question, though. Yeah.
We insure it before it's up to fire.
Well, yeah. Yes.
How many of these newspaper drops were around town, and where did they get the news if the hotel wasn't there?
Oh, after that, don't get me started on this rector. After that, rector had a lot of nerve. Okay, let me see if I can describe it to you. You know where the Oddfellows Hall is? Downtown? To the left of it was a very small boarding house that rector had the nerve to call a hotel. And the news started dropping in his lobby there. Yeah. I don't want to talk about that rector anymore. But. And then he went on and actually did something at East Walpole too. I followed him a little bit and see what he was up to. All right, other questions? Yeah.
The newspapers that you showed,
Yeah.
I noticed on one of your slides in the corner, it looked like there were, an obituary was there, a part of one. Did they typically run, or would they run obituary?
Yeah, they would. And it would range all the way from no obituary at all, because plenty of people, to one or two lines, so-and-so died in East Walpole, to if someone were important, like Deacon Willard Lewis, a real full-blown obituary. I love obituaries, because sometimes it's the only biography a person's going to get. So I always look for obituaries. And there's some pretty good ones in there. Other questions? All right, thank you for your attention. I went a little bit over there. Yes?
What do they do with the pigeons? I lived in Norway and we had a big barn. And they had a window
Yeah.
on the second floor.
Yeah.
And they had all these little boxes.
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, we would sell the pigeons for.
Yeah.
And what did they use them for? I mean, they weren't those return big pigeons, no, those homemade pigeons.
A lot of people are pigeon hobbyists. They really are. I didn't show you pictures of fancy pigeons, but they can get really elaborately fancy with colors and feathers every which way. It's a hobby. It's a hobby, pigeon raising. And it was in Walpole. And it's possible whoever it is in Norwood was raising pigeons because it's a fun hobby. People do it in the city still.
They just have, they keep them.
Look up fancy pigeon and you'll see how pretty they can be. They really are very pretty. Yeah.
Can you go back to the aerial view of the town center somewhere?
I'll try to. Okay. Let's see. So you mean like the bird's eye view map? Okay, we're going way back.
Yeah.
Okay. Aha.
Let me see. So the hotel was from 1873 till 1890?
1894.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when did they do the 1A extension?
Oh, 1830 or so.
Oh, it was?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, so that's why it's surprising that there wasn't, of course they had to go through Cedar Swamp, all the way down to Rentham, it's going across Cedar Swamp.
Yeah.
So it was not a trivial thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, wow.
The image there looks a little different
Yeah.
because the photo showed before drawings.
I
This may be, the artist kind of rented.
I think it is. I have studied and studied this and tried to get, very good point. I've really studied it, trying to make sense, and I think there's a lot of artists and license in this. There has to be.
Well, yeah.
It's 1882.
Yeah.
Yeah. do. Very soon.
Is it?
Yep.
1882.
Was that the present town hall up there in the left corner, or is that another building?
No, I think,
Yes, it is.
oh, you think it is?
If you
Oh, it is, because there's Stone Street. Yeah, there's the future Stone Street. You're absolutely right. Stone Street did not yet exist. There's the future School Street extension. So yes, that is the corner of Town Hall. If you want to see this, we have a gorgeous, huge version of this in the Historical Society that is so worth coming to look at. You can really find all sorts of things. If you live in the center of town, you might find your house. All right, so, good. Thank you for your